Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Smoke Pit. Today you have myself, Dan Sharp, your host. My co-host Mike Sensi is out of town, and so I'm going to be doing a bit of an op-ed style episode today. It'll be a mini episode on one of the most frequent questions that I get asked: how to be a better leader in combat. Now, to begin with, this is not meant to be at all arrogant or to come off like I know better than anyone else, but everything that I have to say, I have learned the hard way. And if you can take anything from this, whether you're about to join the military, you've been in for a while, or you're just starting out your career as a leadership, everything I say is a lesson that I learned. And you may not use everything you read in a book. You may not use every tool in your toolbox, but if there's anything that I teach here today that can save even one life, then it'll have been worth it. So to be a better leader, and specifically combat, because you have a big distinction between garrison leadership and combat leadership, what I would say the most important thing to realize is that you as that leader, your pain doesn't matter, your suffering doesn't matter, your discomfort doesn't matter. All that matters is the mission and the people to the left and to the right of you. So whenever you're tired, you think about how tired that 18-year-old must be, or the new guy, the person who just showed up to the unit. Whenever you're frustrated or whenever you're scared, just imagine how scared they are. Now imagine how much more scared or more tired or discouraged they would be if they look over and they see their leadership with that panicked look on their face or that exhausted look on their face. They're looking to you for inspiration. And it's your responsibility as a leader to set that example, not just in the way you conduct yourself, but in your spirit and in the energy that you bring forth to the mission. And setting the example goes beyond that with taking the initiative. Through the various studies in combat, there are multiple ways to generate combat power: speed, focus, surprise, boldness. All those things are indicative of initiative, because a bad plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed later on. Your job as a leader is to create and exploit opportunities. You create those opportunities by taking the initiative. You exploit those opportunities by having that initiative, and also instilling that bit of initiative in your subordinates. So that being said, you have to trust your subordinates to make their own decisions. You can't fire their weapons for them. You can't run to cover. You can't reload for them. You have to trust them. And there's an old saying, never tell somebody how to do something, rather just tell them what should be done and let them surprise you with their ingenuity. That's kind of the philosophy behind commander's intent. You tell them at the end of the day what you want your battlefield to look like, and you trust them to shape that for you. So now that trust that you have between yourself and your subordinates, that really only gets established with familiarity. If you show up to a unit and you immediately get deployed with them, which I've seen, it's happened to me once actually when I went to Afghanistan. I got there, we deployed a few days later. They were like, "Here's your squad," and the first operation I did with them was an actual combat patrol in Sang in Afghanistan. And so we had no familiarity. I think I had one guy who had came over with me, and he was in my squad too, and I had worked with him, so he knew me and he trusted me, but the other guys didn't. Imagine how terrifying that is, being on your first patrol, and the guy who's leading you, you have no confidence or trust in him and his abilities or the way he thinks, the way he'll react to something. It's very difficult. So as best as you can, you want to create that familiarity and that trust. Now, a way to expedite that process is to realize one simple fact. Trust goes down. Loyalty goes down. You have a responsibility to your subordinates. You have a responsibility to the people that you are underneath, but not nearly as important as the responsibility you have to the men under your charge, because their lives are directly in your hand. And trying to do something just for the sake of appeasing the person who is writing your evaluation is foolish. and your responsibility and your trust goes to them. You have to put their safety and their comfort and their mission accomplishment above your own. And at the end of the day, you cannot take a second or third objective if you cannot even take the first. So you have to take care of your troops, and they will pay you back. Now, that also being said, there is an interesting bit in Marine Corps Doctrine Publication 1 Warfighting that says, until a commander has reached a decision, it is the duty of his subordinates to offer their insights and professional opinions, even though this may be in disagreement with what their superior has going on. And so once a decision has been made, they are required to enforce it as if it was their own. But until that decision has been made, it is their responsibility to tell them, what they feel and what they think would be best. And the idea that yes men will not be tolerated. That is specifically in MCDP 1 Warfighting, that yes men will not be tolerated. So as a leader, you have to be open to the possibility that someone may have an idea that you never thought of. Be approachable, be receptive, learn from them. They may know something you don't. But then once that decision has been made, you need to enforce it. You need to take the initiative. And taking the initiative is really how you dictate the pace of any fight or any conflict. It is through initiative that you seek to impose your will upon the enemy, opposed to just reacting to what's being forced upon you. And so the objective of any conflict is to seize the initiative from the enemy, dictate the fight, dictate the pace. And you do that through those traits that we talked about that generate combat power. And you're going to have to push through the human element in that, which is stress, fear, friction, all those things. And you have several different types of frictions. You have external friction, which can be, the enemy, the weather, whatever the case may be. You have internal friction, which may be a lack of communication, or some sort of gear failing, or whatever the case may be. And then you have self-induced friction, which, you didn't maintain your weapon properly, so now it's not working. You didn't bring extra batteries, so now a piece of gear isn't being able to utilize to its full potential. So you want to minimize as much friction as you can, and that is the responsibility of you as a leader, small unit leaders and such, to place yourself at the point of friction. Because as complicated and complex as war may be, there are certain truths that hold through no matter what the engagement is. The fog of war is that which makes the easy seem hard and the hard seem nearly impossible. And there are going to be times where those points of friction require that level of leadership and that level of supervision. But however, you as a leader cannot be the type of individual who micromanages. You need to place yourself at the point of friction to mitigate these stress, but you have to keep an open mind and an open reticle to other points of friction and stress that might present themselves. So when I was a younger leader, when I was a team leader, I was the kind of person that was real hands-on. Like if you can't do it right, then get out of the way and let me do it. I had no problem being the number one man in a stack. I tried to make sure I was a number 2 or number 3 just for command and control, but I had no problem being the point man. Then as you start to get a little older, you realize that that's selfish. You have more value to the squad or to the platoon a few degrees removed back. You as a squad leader or as a platoon sergeant or platoon commander, your best weapon is your voice and your radio. And that's how you command and control. That's how you communicate with the external units and deal with higher and adjacent supporting units, close air support, medevacs, whatever the case may be. Your greatest weapon is your voice and your radio once you start getting higher up. And it is selfish to be that number one man in the stack. Like if you have to do it, you have to do it. At the end of the day, stack bodies, bring everybody home, do what you have to do. But you should not seek to be that person. You should seek to do your job, because it is very difficult to process the fact that the higher up you get in rank, the further removed from the action you become. And, we all want to pull the trigger. We all want to be the hero. We all want to be the one who gets stuff done. But at a certain point with leadership, you have to take yourself out of the scope and observe everything that's going on, because you have to be able to predict things that may happen or anticipate, because any sort of conflict is two wills struggling against each other, seeking to impose force and counterforce against each other. And you as that leader, your responsibility is to take the initiative, to exploit those gaps, and to provide surfaces against where you think the enemy is going to impose their will, so that way they are, dashed upon the rocks. So it is more so your responsibility to turn the map around and say, if I was the enemy, what would I do in this specific moment? Therein lies the rub. So you are in an incredible position where you have to be the one who is responsible for this, and that is a heavy burden to bear, because if somebody doesn't make it home or somebody gets hurt, you spend the rest of your life questioning yourself, did I make the right move? Did I do this? Did I do that? You can't do that. You can't let that fear paralyze you in the moment, because hesitating may actually be more costly than making a less than sound decision. All you can do is make a decision born of a school of thought based on the information that you have at hand. And the resources we as leaders expend are human lives, so you have to take the gravity of that appointment with the utmost severity and school yourself in tactics, techniques, procedures, the after-action reports. I remember being in Afghanistan, I was getting little to no sleep because I was reading after-action reports and looking at rat lines and talking to other squad leaders and going into the intel shops and trying to figure out any little morsel of information that I could to keep my men alive. And that's going to be your burden as a leader. You're going to get less sleep. You're going to get less chow. You're going to have less you time. You're going to spend more time looking at maps and writing orders and communicating than, jerking off in a porta-john. Look, that's your responsibility. There's been times where we all think that we could do something better, but if you stick around long enough, and whether you go enlisted or officer, you'll have that opportunity. And at that time, it's put up or shut up. And you'll have to ask yourself, did I prepare myself enough for this? Did I read enough? Did I study enough? Did I foster that relationship with my subordinates that I feel that as you go through the levels of war and you get all the way down, strategic and operational and tactical, when you get down to that tactical level, do you have the confidence that is necessary to be able to lead that unit? And now you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, and there's going to be times where your men fuck you. They tell you that they have this, but they don't. They tell you that this was good to go, but it's not. So you want to inspect what you expect, but you're going to have to plan for the fact that sometimes devil dogs are going to put a fucking on you. And, they will if you let them. And then, the enemy's going to try to fuck you, and then the weather and communication, all that stuff. And you're going to be in this position where the world is fucking coming to an end, and you're the one who is single-handedly responsible for, pulling people out of the fire. And that's what's so mundane for a lot of people, is that my worst day in Iraq is being a patrol leader. We're taking casualties. It's a layered ambush. The radio's down. It's 100 and some odd degrees. I got 100 pounds of gear on me. To me, that's a 10 stress. That's the worst possible case imaginable. And then you come back home and you see somebody going nuclear over the fact that their coffee wasn't the right order. And so you have to put things into perspective. And then even so, when you're in combat and you're in that situation where it is incredibly stressful, you cannot let things compound. Address each problem individually. Okay, we're being ambushed. All right, repel the assault. All right, the radio is down. Okay, remedial action. Let's try to create an avenue where we can get to higher ground. Are we gonna increase our rate of fire? Are we going to send a maneuver element? Are we going to banana peel back? Are we going to pop smoke and cover or conceal our movement until we can get to cover? All right, so now we got casualty. All right, is he litter or is he ambulatory? What's the severity of it? Okay, so it's hot. All right, I can't really do much about that except for I hydrated before the patrol. I got all this gear on me. Well, I'm physically and mentally strong. So you look at all these problems individually versus accumulatively, and you'll find that they are much easier to solve. You cannot let the sum of your problems weigh you down, because each one of those things sucks, and like this might be a 4 on the scale, this might be a 6, this might be a 7, this might be a 2 individually, but people look at that as like it's a 27 out of 10 and they're just fucking melting down. They don't know what to do. But if you look at each problem individually, it's not that bad. And if you can address each problem individually and delegate, which is an incredibly powerful tool of any leader. All right, Sharp, you're in charge of this. All right, Wade, you're in charge of this. All right, McKenna, you're in charge of this. And you start delegating those tasks and putting troops to deal with each one of those, then you start to find that the tempo picks up a little bit, and you start to kind of get in a groove a little bit. And like, all right, now, I might actually make it out of this fucking shithole alive. Some fucking piece of shit city that you can't even spell the name of. Am I going to fucking die here? Absolutely fucking not, because I'm going to do everything in my power to continue the fight. And so communicating with the other people in your unit is incredibly important, because if you get too focused on one problem, they may have a piece of information that is vital to your OODA loop. You observe, orient, decide, and act. Or in some cases, depending on what the situation, you might orient yourself before you observe. But regardless, might be a piece of information that is vital to your process. And if you're too focused on one thing, you may not catch that. And so any patrol leader, or say if you're going in a squad or a platoon, whoever's in charge, you're responsible for everything external. Your assistant patrol leader, or whoever's their second in command, they're in charge of everything internal. So that's very important to remember. What is your billet? What are you in charge of? What is your slice of the pie? What can you do to help other people with theirs once you've already established dominance upon the battlefield of what you're responsible for? So to kind of summarize that up a little bit, being a leader is intended to be selfless. You're inherently going to expose yourself more to enemy fire. You're going to paint a target on yourself. You're going to assume more responsibility. You're going to assume more stress. And that's the burden that you bear. And if you don't like it, then get the fuck out. I'm not intend to be arrogant and not intending to, offend anybody, but at the end of the day, it's the military. Nobody fucking cares about your feelings when you're in the shit. Nobody fucking cares, if you're tired, or if you're fucking sore, or if your girlfriend broke up with you, or you're fucking having money problems when you're in a firefight. Nobody gives a fuck. Do your job. That's all fucking people care about. We could fucking cry about it and fucking talk to Chaplain afterwards, but when you're actually in combat, when you're actually doing operations, nobody fucking cares. Do your job. Because you're not going to have fucking problems if you get shot in the face. Easy day, right? So being able to take accountability for that and push your own problems to the back of your head and delegate with what you have is, I feel, one of the best traits of a leader that you can possibly portray. And so, you're going to ask different people, what they feel is the best traits of a leader. Yeah, a lot of people will say, brave, determined, creative, cunning, adaptable. These are all things that you can train yourself to be in one aspect or another. But everybody has a different leadership style. It's kind of like a soup. You see different leaders, you read different books, you observe different things, and you add to your own stew. And you're like, oh, I like when this guy does this, or I like how, this guy is, always there to, help with pallets or whatever, even though he doesn't have to. He doesn't use his billet or his authority for self-comfort or self-gain. And then you add that stuff. But it's also equally important to look at leaders that you don't have respect for and promise yourself that you'll never be that way. I can't tell you how many times I've, coming up in the Marine Corps, there's guys like, oh, I hate when Staff Sergeant does this, or I hate when Corporal does that. And then, when they get promoted to Corporal, that's exactly what they do. And if you don't like something, then don't become it. And if you feel that you're starting to become that, either change or get the fuck out. Because at the end of the day, the entire purpose of the military is to do one of two things: either train for war or conduct war. Now, granted, we have humanitarian missions, and I'm probably going to get some fucking angry DMs or whatever later on, but more or less, war serves policy, and if we're talking about being a leader in combat, you're either training or you're conducting, and those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I remember one of the best things that my leadership did for me is on my first deployment. I was a saw gunner, carried the light machine gun, and they're like, "Hey, Sharp, you're going to be a team leader for this patrol because you're going to be a team leader when we get back." And so now you could say that, you led a team in Iraq. And, granted, it wasn't our biggest operations. It wasn't, the sexy raids and all that stuff, but just going out on a basic security patrol. Maybe catch a little contact, maybe don't, whatever the case may be. But having that responsibility thrust upon you really helps you prepare for it. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to be fucking ready for that first patrol that they're supposed to lead by themselves. Nobody. I remember I wasn't. It was a fucking terrifying feeling. But being thrust in that fucking position, being forced to step up, asking the road to rise to meet you, is incredible experience. So take that opportunity whenever you can. If you have the ability to volunteer for billets or to take initiative when you're in training, or get some of your buddies together and like, all right, hey, for this training exercise, I'm going to be a patrol leader, or you're going to be the team leader, whatever the case may be. Absolutely fucking do it. Absolutely fucking do it, because the last thing you want to do is be in that real life situation and freeze, because you don't have that experience and you haven't trained, you haven't been adapted for it. So that was one of the best things that my leadership did for me. And so when I was in that position, that's what I did for my subordinates. Like, hey, you're gonna be leading this patrol, and they're looking at me like fucking wide eyes, like, Sergeant, like, what? I'm like, hey, look, I was leading patrols as a 21-year-old E3 in Iraq, like on my own with like no adult supervision. So like, you can do this. There were kids who were 19 that were squad leaders and platoon sergeants, and Iwo Jima and Battle of the Bulge and all that. So it's not impossible. And it's funny to think that you have the your counterparts back home, the people who are your age, and kind of see like where they are and what they're doing and stuff, and you kind of think about the difference between like the kind of individual who's in their 20s and they're like leading a squad in combat, and the type of individual who just like is only responsible for their computer, their laptop, their workstation, whatever the case may be. And you kind of see like the dynamic and personalities. Like, you have to be a fucking meat eater. You have to have a little bit of bass in your voice. You have to take the initiative. You can't be you can't have trepidation, because whether more particularly to my combat arms, but whether you're a ranger or a marine or infantry, whatever the case may be, there's somebody out there fucking in a cave or a tent somewhere shaking in their fucking sandals, that the thought of you, a United States Marine or a United States soldier or a United States, service member, is going to come kick down their door and fucking end their life. And that's the way that the world sees us, They look at you and they don't see, a scared 18-year-old or, a brand new fucking second lieutenant who doesn't understand, how to fucking run their platoon. All they see is, a soldier or a sailor or an airman or, para or whatever the case may be. All they see is that facade, that legacy that has been created by 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds putting fucking bayonets in motherfuckers. Because, when push comes to shove, we all have that killer instinct in us, and that's not mutually exclusive to the military. Like, any civilian, most civilians put in that position where they have to, fight for their life, will do so. That's not something that's exclusive to the military. Like, you don't, like, you're not a killer just because you're in the military. Like, we all have that capacity inside of us, especially when it comes to people that we care about. And one thing that I will say is that it is not like for love of country or for medals or whatever, or anything like that makes somebody run across a field that is swept with machine gun fire. It's the thought of being disgraced in the sight of their friends and in their eyes. The thought of being a coward, the thought of being called less than the rest. And so we all have that capacity inside of us. And so being able to channel that and being able to call upon that more often than your average individual, you also have to realize that our enemy possesses that as well. Whether it's, a 10-year-old with a suicide vest, or, a 53-year-old Chechen, who was fucking sniping Marines out of turrets doing 40 miles an hour in Ramadi in '07. They all possess that, so it's not mutually exclusive. And so this idea that leadership just fosters the idea that, the people we're fighting are fucking dumb and they're fucking shitheads, that's incredibly insulting. That's incredibly insulting to all the U.S. service member and our allies who have been killed in combat. And it's like you have everybody from National Guard to Special Forces being killed by our enemy. It's not something that's mutually exclusive to us, and you have to realize that your enemy is capable of that. Your enemy has the capacity to inflict their will upon you, to cause you casualties, to break your lines of communication, to induce that stress. And it is up to you as a leader in order to counter that. And so this fucking idea that they're all just goat fuckers, that's asinine. You're fighting a very highly intelligent, adaptable enemy who's been fighting, since he was old enough to fucking hold a weapon. And in other countries that might be future adversaries, the same is true. People don't have as fucking easy a life as most of us here in America do. And so you want to study your enemy. You want to learn from them. You want to find out why they're fighting. Get inside their head. Like I said earlier, turn the map around. And there's a quote from Ender's Game that I'm paraphrasing, that once you truly know your enemy, once you truly know who he is and understand why he's fighting, then you grow to love them. And only once you love them enough to understand them and understand how they think and what they do and what they're going to do next, only then, once you love them that much, can you know how to destroy them. And that's a heavy burden to bear. Is once you immerse yourself into a culture or into a people's way of life, like being there to take lives and destroy, that's something that's not as easy as just pulling a trigger of a faceless stranger. And once you invest yourself into these things, you have to realize that this is going to carry with you for a while. I was talking to some veterans earlier on today, with the way it was with Vietnam and the way it is in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we put all this effort into taking cities and clearing towns and stuff, and you see either the North Vietnamese took it back over, or Iraq, Al Qaeda took back over a bunch of cities where I lost friends, a bunch of cities where we lost guys in Afghanistan, Sangin, and shit like that. ISIS and other various agents, Taliban and stuff, they took these areas back over. And it's absolutely fucking gut-wrenching to think that, the place that you were, not only as a soldier or a Marine, but as a leader, the place that you led men, the place that you called those EOD reports and those medevacs, the places that you've carried bodies onto, trucks and helicopters and, seen carnage and destruction, these areas are being forfeited back to the enemy. And it's absolutely fucking gut-wrenching, because you think, what was it all for? And so anybody who thinks that, going into a leadership position or joining the military is glory, it's really not. It's like finding out that the best thing that you could have possibly imagined in your life, something that you've wanted all this time, and then it's got a terrible dark secret that haunts you and you can never tell anybody about. Because it's hard to explain the way that these things make you feel. And especially as a leader, questioning yourself and doubting and stuff like that, that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life. But you can absolutely fucking not display that in front of any of your troops. You have to understand this, and you have to appreciate this. Whatever your doubts, whatever your insecurities, you're allowed to have them. You're a person. You're free thinking, and that's what makes you valuable as a leader. But under no circumstance are you going to display that in front of your subordinates. Because they need a solid leader. They need somebody that they can put their trust in. Because if you trust a leader enough, you're going to follow them through the gates of hell. And sometimes, God damn it, that's what it fucking takes to get a mission done. Whether it be enemy opposition or elements or terrain, sometimes you have to fucking push through hell in order to accomplish the mission. And if you're weak-willed as a leader, if you're hesitant, if you display those signs of weakness, your subordinates are going to crumble way sooner than they would otherwise, than if you put on that facade. And as a subordinate, if you're listening to this, I challenge you, take a look at your leadership next time you're on a hike or a run or something. Look at them and ask yourself, are they really just that fucking tough? Or do they fucking piss lightning and crap thunder? Or is he just as tired as you, but he's putting on the brave face? Or is he just as fucking miserable or scared or whatever the case is? And if you think that it's one way or another, you might be right. All you can do is try to emulate that person and feed off of their strength and accomplish the mission. And so here at the Smoke Pit, we tried to go off script as much as we can and let it be organic. So there was a lot that I probably meant to cover that I didn't. And there's probably some things that I probably talked about too much. So I'd love to hear your feedback, because I may not be leading combat patrols, but as a student of war, you always want to learn more, and especially when you've invested so much of your life into this. So if you've led patrols in combat, or if you have questions about it, feel free to shoot them out. And I'd love to have a discussion with everyone. You can check me out on Pop Smoke Official on Instagram or through the Smoke Pit. And also a big shout out to our sponsors, Combat Comb Over. Use our discount code CREAMPIE, save you some money, and Strike Force Energy, discount code Smoke Pit, which actually just got back from Australia, and I've done 3 overseas international trips in the last 2 months. And then between the business I know and the podcast and all that stuff, Strike Force really gets me through, especially when I'm feeling the fucking jet lag. Yeah, so that'll be it for today's episode. And if you have any thoughts, feel free to reach out. And like I said, like that wasn't intended to me be on a soapbox and tell everybody like how cool I am and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's hard to talk about something that you haven't lived through. And the majority of our combat veterans have gotten out. And there has been a lot of questions of people who are hungry for this role, hungry for this knowledge. And so I appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you next week, and hopefully Sensei will be back. Bye.